confidence in the public's finances. Today, we see encouraging signs that we are on the right track. We are pleased today to release the report to Ontario's third quarter finances for 2018-19. This quarterly report offers an opportunity for Ontario taxpayers to check in on how the government has managed your tax dollars since the fall fiscal update was last delivered. The Fiscal Transparency and Accountability Act requires that this document be made public. Now, you may never have heard of a third quarter report in the past because the previous government only ever presented it 3 times in the past 10 years, despite the legislative requirement to produce it. So by presenting this report ahead of the deadline, our government is backing our commitment to restore accountability, trust, and transparency in Ontario's finances with action. It's yet another example of a promise made and a promise kept. We saw some early good news just last week when Statistics Canada announced that employment in Ontario increased by 41,400 jobs, that's for January, and that growth was driven by the private sector. And our government is building on these actions to connect more workers to good local jobs while encouraging job creation, investment, and trade, both inside and outside of the province. So we're here today to talk about these numbers, and I am pleased to announce there is a lot of good news in those numbers as well. Thanks to stronger economic growth that includes higher levels of business investment and consumer activity, Ontario's revenue position has improved by $1 billion over initial projections. Thanks to this adjustment, our third quarter finances now show that as of December 31st, 2018, Ontario is now projecting a deficit of $13.5 billion for 2018-19. Now, this is great news for the people of Ontario. It's the latest example of Premier Ford's Open for Business and Open for Jobs agenda. It's already paying dividends. More businesses are investing. More people are working. And as a result, our province's bottom line is improving. All this without increasing taxes by 1 single cent. In fact, even after putting more money back in people's pockets, cancelling the cap-and-trade carbon tax, taking early action on hydro, healthcare, and gasoline prices, we still have reduced our inherited deficit from $15 billion to $13.5 billion. That's a $1.5 billion improvement to the bottom line in just a few months. We're already 10% of the way home. The challenge remains in acknowledging that we still have the other 90% in front of us. After years of being lied to, the people of Ontario deserve to hear the honest truth about the hard work still in front of us. And that's why we want to be upfront with you today in saying the road ahead will not always be easy. And in our upcoming 2019 budget, we will show you then our path to balance. Ontario must be ready to respond to global economic headwinds without being weighed down by crippling debt payments. That's what our approach to fixing this government is all about. And though our economy is doing well now, we must acknowledge both global and domestic risks and plan accordingly. This includes acknowledging our rising debt interest burden. We will pay $12.5 billion in interest this fiscal year. Every dollar that goes to servicing that debt is a dollar that could and should go to getting patients out of hospital hallways and into proper care, improving education outcomes, providing the right frontline service at the right time to the right recipient. That's why we have to bring Ontario back to balance, so that every taxpayer dollar goes to the services we rely on. We reiterate that our government is working for the people to put Ontario back on a healthy financial footing and make Ontario the best place for businesses to thrive, grow, and create good jobs. I want to now pass the podium to my colleague, Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy.
Thank you, Vic. I see Colin DeMello back there. He always asks what's on my tie. Today it's cars, Colin, so we're going to drive our government agenda forward. How's that? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that laugh later. Well, thank you, Minister Fedeli. The importance of why we are here today cannot be overstated. As you've just heard, the third quarter finances are another demonstration of how our government is continuing to make progress in restoring trust in the Ontario public finances. Upon election, we took swift action to uncover the true state of the province's finances. As Minister Fedeli just mentioned, we began by conducting an independent financial commission of inquiry and working with EY Canada to conduct a line-by-line review of the past 15 years of government spending. As you know, what we found was sobering. We inherited a $15 billion deficit, and we knew that decisive action was needed to restore trust and accountability in the province's finances. To achieve this, we started talking to you, the people. We consulted internally and externally to understand what programs and services matter most to the people of Ontario, and to gather ideas on how to ensure we're making the best investments to support those programs and services. Overall, what we heard was loud and clear is that the #1 priority in government and for the people of Ontario is responsible fiscal management. I repeat, responsible fiscal management. So we've worked swiftly and diligently to rein in spending across all of government. Already we have frozen unnecessary discretionary spending, placed restrictions on travel, meal, and hospitality spending, instituted a hiring freeze with the exception of essential frontline services. We paused executive compensation increases in the broader public sector, and pending a substantial review, we will have more to say on that. And we released the public accounts, which achieved a clean opinion for the first time in 3 years. And while we can be proud of these initial steps, we remain laser-focused on changing the culture of government by further embedding more rigor and accountability in all our government spending decisions. That is why we're taking further steps to reinforce the government's commitment to end unnecessary discretionary spending, including that governments sometimes engage in and see towards the end of their fiscal years what we often call March Madness, and it's not basketball when we reference that in government. To do so, our government has worked to further control spending at this critical juncture. Specifically, Cabinet has directed all ministries to limit spending to commitments under contract legislation and/or requirements to fulfill core services up to March 31st, 2019. Ministries have also been directed to not undertake any new spending, including spending from within their approved budgets, unless the ministry has sought and received specific direction to do so from Treasury Board. Treasury Board will hold ministries directly accountable for ensuring compliance with these new measures through a rigorous internal reporting mechanism. Collectively, these actions will enable us to implement broader spending restraint and curtail the increase in new spending often seen at this time of the fiscal year. As a government, we have a unique and challenging opportunity to meet the needs of the people of Ontario while exercising responsible fiscal prudence. This is not a challenge that Minister Fedeli and I take lightly. Together with the Premier and our caucus colleagues, we are committed to leading the way in creating a sustainable government not only for today's generation, but also for future generations by implementing the kind of strong measures I've described here today. Thank you. And questions over here, please.
Ministers, we're kind of at a loss. We don't have hard copies of the report that's just been released. We've got a news release that gives some highlights. But if you follow monthly and quarterly government income reporting, you know that there can be wild swings. So I'm wondering if you can point to concrete examples for us that show this isn't just a whole bunch of companies filed this last quarter, that this is not going to be reversed in the next quarterly update.
Well, what we've seen, if you look technically, we've seen growth at 2.4%, where we all forecast growth at 2%. So we know that our plan is working, and we know that we're restoring fiscal health. We've seen stronger economic growth, but we continue to see Ontario making progress, and we know that we're on the right path. We've laid down the foundation now for the businesses to begin hiring, and they've begun hiring, and we see stronger revenue.
In terms of another issue, the Saskatchewan carbon tax court case starts today. Your government is backing that. Your thoughts on the court case, Minister Fedeli, and why don't you also tell us why you wouldn't just rather impose your own carbon tax and have all that revenue to clear away that deficit?
Well, we oppose a carbon tax in any form, absolutely. And we know that we are following the Saskatchewan case closely. We believe that this is something that's going to hurt families and hurt businesses. Look, when we eliminated the cap-and-trade carbon tax in Ontario, we saw $880 million returned to the people of Ontario. We saw $260 each family received more, $80 further if they had natural gas. Price of gas dropped 4.3 cents a litre. The carbon tax, the cap-and-trade tax that was in Ontario hurt families, it hurt business, and it curtailed hiring. That's why we took it away, and we're going to fight with every tool we have to make sure that that carbon tax doesn't come back to the province of Ontario, because it will hurt our businesses and it will hurt families.
Morning, Minister. Richard with 680. Happy New Year to you. The Ontario Cannabis Store tells me that they've signed up a lot of new suppliers recently, and they tell me in a statement, Minister, they actually have ample supply right now. I'm wondering, at what point will you expand the number of retail stores beyond the current 20, sir?
Well, look, we've seen prohibition on cannabis for 100 years. We now know that we're in the business. We've put it online on October 17th. We plan to open stores on April 1st. We've put 25 licenses, made 25 licenses available because we know that the supply is enough to satisfy the 25 stores. We've done all our research, we've put all of our calls out, and we know that we cannot right now open more than 25 stores. You know, we've talked to the federal government and said, you made cannabis legal on October 17th without having proper supply. So we've done the prudent thing. I'm actually quite proud of the way we've stepped into the cannabis sector slowly and carefully. It's going to be here for decades upon decades. Let's do it right.
On another matter, if I may, a lot of GM Oshawa workers remain critical, sir, of how your government handled that situation. The union representing them really continues to step up their fight. And tomorrow we're going to see Sting, the musical artist, go to Oshawa and perform in solidarity with them. I'm wondering if you have any regrets about your government's handling of that, and how do you feel about Sting going there, sir?
Look, we are going to be offering training for GM employees. We know that we want to see them back to work, and we know that their families want to see them have gainful employment as well. I'm proud of the way Premier Ford has handled this. I think it was the prudent way to go. He acknowledges the realities and knows that the real solution will be in making sure that those families can get gainful employment elsewhere.
And on Sting?
I'll leave the musical aspects of it for my wife, Patty.
Actually, and if I could just add, I'll just quickly add, because out in Pickering, you know, that what took some of the sting out was the Premier that night, and I went with the Premier to go meet with the leaders in Oshawa that very night and made a commitment to work, to do everything we could to help those workers.
Hi, Minister Bethlenfalvy. I'm wondering if you can tell us how much you've budgeted for this new chair of the Corporate Audit Committee, and if you can't tell us that, if you can tell us how many days he's expected to work.
Yes, this is Charles-Antoine Saint-Jean. I'm very excited about our new Audit and Accountability Committee, which is dual purpose to not only focus on the auditors' value for taxpayer money audits, but make sure that, unlike the previous government, they don't get swept under the carpet, that we can act quickly, and to bring some independent rigor to following up on those value for money audits. Charles Saint-Jean, the committee, Charles-Antoine Saint-Jean, will be tasked to meet eight times a year, so there may be a little bit of preparatory work involved as well. But what I'm really excited about this committee is it really is allowing for greater accountability for government on behalf of taxpayers to be on top of how money is spent and get value for taxpayer money.
So how much have you budgeted then for him? Eight committee meeting days is not how many days he'll be working.
Well, I think the big picture is that we've saved $3.2 billion.
That's not what I'm asking you, though, Minister.
Yeah,
How do you defend spending $2,500 a day on the chair of a committee who's supposed to be cutting waste?
Fair enough. He is one of the most well-regarded former Controller General of Canada, current chair of the Public Sector Accounting Board. The $15 billion deficit that we inherited, that we've now announced is $13.5 billion, is serious work. He's a very serious and credentialed person to help us find billions of dollars that we have to do.
To the Treasurer, I just wanted to ask, looking ahead to the budget, you don't have a budget date yet, I guess. Is that right? Have you determined when you want to table that?
Someone was going to ask.
We were waiting to see who. I lost the lottery on who's going to ask. So we'll be announcing the budget date when we're ready.
So there's no other date. Is this budget your first budget? Is this when you get the difficult decisions out of the way? I mean, you've been talking a lot about austerity and the need to tighten our belts. Is this the bad news budget, I guess, if you will?
We have to start with the understanding that the previous government was spending $40 million a day more than they brought in. That's where we have to begin to understand that. And we know that in this budget, we must also indicate our path to balance. That's mandatory in this budget. So this will be a fairly significant document for the people of Ontario to show our path to balance. And so that's what makes it so significant.
And one final question. Will there be more money for autism services? The government announced it's rejigging that program last week. Obviously, it's maybe more equitable to a lot more people, but certainly a lot of other people are very upset about the way it's done. Is there going to be some transition funding to help those people who are going to lose out as a result of the changes?
There were 23,000 families with children with autism who received no help whatsoever. So this plan is a fair, sustainable, and equitable plan. I can tell you, when I held my roundtables on autism in North Bay, we all heard loud and clear from the families, especially families in the North, who said to us, look, the amount of money is one issue, but what we really need to know is, can we spend it on the areas that are critical to my family? That's what they asked us. And that's the message that we brought back and said, wherever we go, whatever we do, the families in North Bay told me that the money is of no value to them if they can't spend it on the things that are important. We all don't have the same services in the North that are readily available in the South. And so we've delivered on that. And that's why at home, they're very happy with this plan.
Just building on that question, though, Minister, will there be any additional funding above and beyond the $321 million for autism?
You know, if I could just add to the Minister, I think he answered the question quite well, but as Treasury Board, what we found out was the program we inherited was not only unfair, but it was unsustainable. So the Minister came to Treasury Board twice to request $100 million. So that was the first thing that we did, which was compassionate. I think that the longer term is to make sure that this program is sustainable, that it is fair, as the Minister said, and so that's our approach right now.
So that would be a no. There's no additional money coming for autism services above the $321 million?
This program was redesigned to make it fairer for the families who had 23,000 children with autism on the wait list. In Pickering, I met with numerous families who were suffering because they were on this wait list. And it's one of the things that I'm very proud of our Minister, Minister MacLeod, for the compassion that she's shown to those families and taking action. These are tough decisions. She made the tough decision, and we're very proud of her. And
With respect,
the work
though, it
that
is a
we're
yes
doing.
or no question. Will there be more money for autism funding services in the upcoming budget?
Well, as the minister said, that this is a program that we've gone through in fine detail and will continue to look at. But we'll need some time to take those 23,000 families off the wait list. That'll take some time. More money into diagnostics, early intervention, which is so critical and the evidence shows. So this is an important step.
Hi, Ministers. I've been going through your election platform, and there was a promise in there to cut the corporate tax rate by 1 point and to do it in year 2. Is that a promise you plan to keep?
We know that it's the businesses throughout Ontario who are doing the hiring. We've seen that especially just in the month of January. And we know that we have challenges with the United States, who brought in what's called an accelerated capital cost allowance. And what that does is, if you are an Ontario company and a multinational, and you've got to decide, am I going to invest in Ontario or the United States? The choice defaulted to the United States because of that big positive tax activity. We urged the federal government to bring in an accelerated capital cost allowance. They brought it in, and so what we've done is match that here in Ontario with $689 million. So with respect, that is the corporate tax cut. We've already done that because it allows corporations to be able to reduce their capital cost within the first year.
Your platform was very specific, and that wasn't it. So I can take it that's a no. You don't plan to keep that promise.
No. You're misunderstanding. What I'm saying is, we invested the $689 million in the accelerated capital costs for corporations, and we've done that on the 15th of November.
I'm going to move on now. There was a number of other tax breaks in that platform that didn't have a time like them, like the 1 point corporate tax rate cut. That was very specific. There was an income tax cut by 20% for the second bracket, a refundable tax credit for parents, small business income tax rate, tax cut as well. Do you plan to achieve those within this current mandate?
Well, I think the Premier has very clear that we want to return more money into the pockets of Ontario families, and through those measures, that's exactly what we intend to do.
So just one follow-up, because it's related to this. Do you plan to balance the budget within this current mandate?
You know, I like to use my Goldilocks reference to balancing the budget. It won't be too soon, because quite frankly, nobody would believe it. It won't be too long, because anybody can do that. It will be just right.
So what does that mean?
It means in the 2019 budget, you will see a detailed path to balance.
This may be a question for Minister Bethlenfalvy, but you say you want to end the March Madness by freezing ministry spending, but there could be some exceptions if they are approved by the Treasury Board. Can you give us a sense of what the criterias are for these exceptions? What funding can actually be approved while there's this freeze going on?
Well, that's a fair question. Thank you for that. It's the type of thing that I saw in the private sector many times as well. You know, you've got your budget, it's so much, and then you come to the fiscal year and you figure use it or lose it is another term. We saw the federal government last year, governments across the province deal with this. An example last year for the federal government was that they bought 31,000 smartphones in March. So you get this rush every year. You know, we've seen with the previous government that they handed out grants to companies that didn't apply. What we really have put in place here is some rigor around the process to spend money. And Treasury Board, I think the number one thing is to really restore trust and accountability. Treasury Board is playing a much more active role in all the spending so that we can have sustainable government for better hospitals, for better education. So this is an important initiative. And
going forward, and this may be more for Minister Fedeli, in the budget, could we see some funding for a Francophone university? I mean, the fall economic statement said it was canceled, and your government backtracked a bit at saying that it was put on hold. Should we expect to see an update on that in the budget?
I wouldn't want to announce any items that may or may not be in the first
So that's
budget
not
of
a
our
no?
government.
Hi, Minister Bethlenfalvy. I'm just wondering, what can the new Audit and Accountability Committee tell you that Charles Antoine and the Corporate Audit Committee can't?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a good one. You know, in the private sector, you know, I'm 30 years in the private sector. I would encourage the organizations that I work to have a fresh set of eyes, independent eyes, come in and take a look at the various programs and services. And this is something that the federal government did, bringing in more accountability through the Treasury Board in this case, with some more independence, some independent, fresh eyes to take a look at how government spends its money and whether it's getting value for money. We have a great organization in the Auditor General's value for money programs, but what we don't want to do is what we've seen in the past is the value for money audits are swept under the carpet. We're going to take immediate action on all, as we said last fall, on all the value for money audits, and through this committee, we'll be able to direct more the bureaucracy to focus on those things that are greatest risk to the taxpayer and get better value for taxpayer money.
And if I can just follow up on Mariko's question, how much have you budgeted for Charles Antoine, his new appointment?
Well, that seems to be a odd question. I would say thousands. You know, thousands. Thousands. With all respect, it's thousands of dollars, 8 times a year. I think if you can do the math, I'm sure many can do the math here. It's relative to the billions that we have to find savings for, efficiencies, duplication, so that we can afford programs and services for those who need it most. I think this is, again, some of the best money that we can get with such a significant addition to our Audit and Accountability Committee.
For Vic, Happy New Year, gentlemen. Vic, just to clarify from Jessica's question, on the second bracket middle class tax cut, the talk in the campaign was maybe not till year 3 or 4 of the mandate that you could do that. Now that you've found this, or saved this, or got this extra $1 billion in revenue to lower the deficit, can you keep to that timetable? Will people see those tax cuts in this mandate?
I think Premier Ford has been very clear that everything we are going to do, we do for the people. And he has made it very clear that tax relief is coming, that we pay enough taxes in the province of Ontario. We talked about how we've saved $1.5 billion to date, and that we have not had 1 cent tax increase. So I think you're seeing the path that we want to take. So it's bringing real tax relief to families. The carbon, eliminating the cap and trade, put $260 back in their family pockets, $80 more with natural gas, 4.3 cents off the price of gas. The list, quite frankly, goes on in terms of the tax savings, but our plan is to continue with bringing tax relief to families.
So was that a very long yes?
That's a very long answer to say that relief continues to come to the families in Ontario.
So within this mandate?
Relief is coming.
Minister, the public accounts that were filed in the fall didn't include a financial statement for the Ontario Place Corporation. Those have not been updated online either. At least when I checked yesterday, there was still no audited financial statement for the Ontario Place Corporation. It's a document that the government is supposed to legally receive and make public. Is the government hiding that?
Well, I think I'm unaware of that. We'll have to get back to you on that. That's pretty specific, so we'll endeavor to make sure we get back to you.
I mean, I'm sorry, but Vic, you have to sign the public accounts. Your signature is on them. This is a pretty important file for the government that's been pretty public, and this is basic information that the public doesn't have and hasn't been made available for almost going on 6 months now.
We'll look into, quite frankly, we'll look into that for you. That's the first I've heard of that, to be quite frank.
I'm wondering how you justify an increase in MPP's accommodation budgets at a time when you're preaching austerity.
That is done through the Internal Board of Economy. It's an all-party group, so it's done out of necessity. They meet and they make their decisions independent of our General Caucus or our Cabinet.
So do you disagree with that decision? Are you going to be returning your 20% increase in the accommodation budget?
Well, I am an MP, one of those MPPs who lives more than 50 kilometers away, but I think the decisions of the Board of Internal Economy are ones that are guided through the legislature, and that we have always respected their final decisions. But again, it is an all-party decision. It's not made by just one party.
All right, we have time for one more question and a follow-up, please.
Hi, Minister. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Following up to where Benzie left off, back to the budget.
Oh, yeah.
What's wrong?
No, I'm trying to think, where did he leave off?
Oh, well, he's right over there.
Where's the budget?
It's kind of an old tactic to get rid of all the rough stuff in the first year. Dalton McGuinty, for example, did it with the much reviled health tax, and in the hopes that by year 4, just before an election, people will forget about year 1 and all the tough stuff. Is that your strategy, and do you have any love for taxpayers coming up in the next 2, 3, 4 budgets?
Well, I think we've already shown our intent with the taxpayers. In the fall economic statement, we had the LIFT program, low-income individual and family tax credit, which returned millions of dollars to people who are earning minimum wage, $30,000 or less. The largest and the most generous tax cut in our history. 1.1 million people benefited from it. I think you continue to see this weekend you can come ice fishing in the north for free. We continue to bring relief for families, whether it's hunting and fishing licenses, whether it's vehicle registrations and permits. It's all about bringing relief to families, and everything we do will be for the people. And so you'll see more in the budget when we deliver the budget. But quite frankly, what you will see from us is restoring trust and accountability as well. What we tell you, you can count on.
Minister, many families who have children with autism would argue that they're not getting relief. They're going to be in a worse position than before. Is it possible? I mean, you seem to be indicating that there will be no extra funding in this budget for autism. Could there potentially be in future budgets?
The 23,000 families who, with children with autism who were not receiving any support from the government may have a different approach. They're finally seeing support, and I'm very pleased that we've doubled the diagnostic services, especially, once again, in our beloved Northern Ontario gets a double as well. The 23,000 families who are now receiving support certainly are appreciative.
What about families who will receive less support? What about families who will receive less support? Is there going to be any more money?
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.